Alright, and we're on in 3, 2, 1. This is Holographic Harley, with Harley. I'm Harley. Here we go. So today's talk is of COVID-19, misinformation, and David Icke. Icke's stance on COVID-19 is a paradox of paranoid propaganda, as to crystallize the perception of self to thereby disassociate his viewers from reality. Nowadays, David Icke's core narrative, or rather agenda, is that the 1% control information and thus the stream of perception. Icke refers to the 1% as a cult, that of which he has labeled as a cabal, a hidden hand, or rather a death cult. But this is nothing new. John expresses in Revelations of the Holy Bible that they are known as the religion of Babylon, and have been practicing their religion for 7,000 years. Icke's language, however, by invoking them as a cult, incites fear into the minds of his viewers, and this form of cause creates an effect of destructiveness, destructive reactions and emotions. But when you refer to it as Babylon, it neutralizes any source of fear. For I find that fear-based definitions create thought forms of separation. The idea of fear and anxiety that one group might cancel out the other. And so this creates misinformation and polarization. And so on one hand, Icke reveals what Babylon is doing, but on the other, as he talks, his voice is of anger and rage. You can see the pinkness in his face. But by doing this, David Icke is actually an affirmation of the dark, and he is their greatest adversary. And this is most likely why he remains alive to this day. Yes, Icke is right about how the mainstream media controls the predominant narrative to thus influence perception, but they do not control perception. Icke gives Babylon way too much credit, more than they actually deserve. And this is the paradox. Icke assigns the 1% labels of power. For instance, cult, death cult, that is a power. And this gives them more power than they actually have. And so by projecting the narrative that the 1% will take over the world in the form of a technocracy, this way of fear thinking, or fear-based definitions, literally shapes the audience to shift their attention into a reality wherein this just might actually occur. And this is funny for me, because as I sit in this room right now, no one's around me, and no one is controlling me at all. And so by framing this apocalyptic view, this actually inverts connection and love, and creates divisions, fault lines, and the 1% then have the ability to control the masses more than they actually do. So for instance, Icke invokes that COVID-19 is staged by the 1%. This shapes the perception of his followers to inadvertently remind them that they are weak and powerless for allowing this to occur. Look, COVID-19 is real. I know COVID-19 is real, for it is a reflection of our collective consciousness. Humanity is sick. Our culture is severely wounded. Those last bits were the words of Terence McKenna. But our culture is sick, and this COVID-19 is a reflection of us. But by saying otherwise, by saying COVID-19 it's not real, Icke is framing the perception, the propaganda, that it causes public distrust, which will eventually create an uproar and destruction. And this again, paradoxically, gives the 1% more power than they actually have. Now, in this particular moment of time, Icke is promoting a fear-based narrative of propaganda to make you distrust that there's an illness going on. This COVID-19 is reflective, again, of our society. It's an opportunity for us to ask ourselves, who do we want to be? Do we want to be a humanity that creates out of destruction after this by not trusting anyone? Or do we want to look within, let go of our external surroundings just for a moment, and ask ourselves, what do we want to create? But I'll give you another example. For instance, I've followed David Icke for about 2 years, and those 2 years have been all throughout college. I should probably have the equivalent hours. I should get a master in David Icke or in conspiracy, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But for instance, way back in December, Icke was tweeting of sources that coronavirus began in a Wuhan lab. And by the end of February, going into March, Icke was invoking that 5G was the cause of COVID-19. And you can see that on London Real of Rose Icke 1 and Rose Icke 2. But by the end of April into the onsets of May, Icke walked back each and every comment and said, there is no such thing as COVID-19. So why flip-flop your story so much? Because by doing this, it broadens Icke's audience. So even to the extreme that they no longer know what is the what. And this frame of reference, it leaves people not only confused and a daze, but rather angry, full of rage, and just solely bitter. And by not believing that none of this is real, as soon as the lockdown's over, it's going to create a creation of anger. So you see, this aspect of misinformation creates behavior of us versus them, rather than us and them, because we're all in this together. And what following this misinformation, what it does is it engenders a level of fear, of paranoia, and this is what I mean by the paradox of propaganda, that when you call this a so-called pandemic, it creates the quote-unquote the truth, that our truth that none of this is real will be canceled by the 1%, and so people come together and rally. And this is a real low vibe. It's a low vibration field, and it's dangerous. It's potentially destructive. It can cause a riot. It will cause people to separate each other. And by paving this way, this idea, you will see a militarized police force in all cities as to prevent a riot from occurring. And all of this is just to justify David Icke's ego, as so he may say to his audience, look, I told you so, I was right. And this is what the definition of misinformation means, to shape the perception of the viewer so that they don't even know. They're just reacting. Their emotions are everywhere. And by emotions, I mean E-motion, energy in motion. Their energy is everywhere. Truly, truly, consider this thought just for a moment. Entertain it. For over a decade now, YouTube has allowed David Icke to voice whatever he wanted, but now that he is invoking an utter lie and calling it truth, which is the example of doublethink, to know that you don't know what you don't know, YouTube removes his content, and Icke says, oh, they're removing me, they're censoring me, they're banning me. He's playing a victim, but you can't be a victim of your own choices. And so, indeed, Icke, his ruthlessness, his renegade animosity towards polarization of seeing himself as this figure. You know, in the Truth Vibrations, he once wrote that Socrates is always with him. That's the father of duality, of polarization. And so the past, this lying that he's doing, the past has returned before him. This is called karmic debt. An example of this destructive behavior can be seen when on Rose Icke 3, when Icke is talking to Brian, and Brian shares his story of his grandmother being diagnosed with COVID-19, and Icke just interrupts and says, no, she wasn't, because COVID-19 doesn't exist. And Brian just stares at him and says, okay, David, like seriously, how much of a bully do you have to be to argue with the man who allows you a platform to speak your mind? This is the destructive behavior. And so right now, Icke is making a joke of himself, but you know, who knows, perhaps he enjoys this form of masochistic self-mockery. Look, it is what it is. We can all think what we want to think, but we all must rethink David Icke for his affirmations, what he does, what he says. He is an affirmation of the dark, of the Babylonian beast, and he is their greatest adversary. But like every tyrant who's always existed in the history of history, Icke he wants us to question everything except for him. And the moment you do, he says that's not true. For instance, he claims that all information is a lie except for his own work. That's what doublethink is, and when you are under the spell of misinformation, you don't see that. And so Icke invokes this notion, this idea of truth, yet he never actually defines what truth is. He just says truth, and that's it. He leaves it at that. And this is a very linear way of seeing truth, of polarization, of I'm right implies you're wrong. I had a friend share with me yesterday, and I wrote it down. He said, truth must encompass the whole collection of perspectives on reality, which we find in creation, all of them. And so truth is not just this narrow worldview. It encompasses channeling, it encompasses remote viewing, it encompasses a writer expressing themselves, an actor becoming the character, all of it. Truth encompasses everything. It is multidimensional, just like how we are multidimensional in the womb. All possibilities exist, but then when we're born, we are put inside a box. But I digress from that. When Icke talks about this entire notion of an evil Hunger Games society, a cult that controls it all, when you give into this, you start to get a bit paranoid. You start to fall under the spell of fear. And it's used to capture the viewer's perception that the present moment is never good enough. We must ask ourselves this old sagacious question: what in this moment is lacking? Think of that. What in this moment is lacking? Because very soon you shall find that it is nothing. Life never lacks. Life is abundant. Only the mind lacks while entrapped within survival mode. Perhaps David has forgotten this, and perhaps this is why he discusses conspiracy more than he discusses consciousness, connection, and love. We need to dispel ourselves, or those who follow Icke, from his danger from this misinformation, because it will lead us down to a path of destruction, not a path of connection. Well, that's all I got for you today. Before I close, I want to thank Miss Pamela Aarylan and Darryl Anka, who channels Bashar, for inspiring me to record this podcast. So Bashar, Darryl, Pamela, thank you for inspiring me. You can see the links below in the bibliography of how I was inspired. But just thank you for reminding humanity that we all must let go of our fears and allow our hearts to flow from within. We need to let go of these fear-based definitions. We need to let go and let God. Until next time, one love. Be well.